material in it. So tonight we'll finish it up with the last module, hardening the network, which is actually the shortest module in it. But what we're going to do here is we talk about defense in depth, and you've heard defense in depth. All you guys that were in the military practice defense in depth in one manner or another, I'm sure. How to secure network hardware, harden hosts to networks, when we harden stuff, we just take a lot of the what we call attack surface away. The attack surface is services or ports that are open to give somebody the opportunity to attack the stuff. How to educate users and how to test existing security measures. What are we going to do? How are we going to test what's going on with these things? So defense in depth, and this one up here says, early networks subscribe to the shell around the network. We just won't let anything in and the world will be fine. Problem is there are a lot of attacks that take place internally. And those, the shell doesn't do us any good because the shell just protects those individuals that are attacking from internally to do those things. But this is kind of what we would have, and this says user and organization. Sometimes, and I think one of the slides talked about layer 8 of the OSI model, which doesn't really exist obviously, but users. And users are the big thing. I was in a squadron one time, and the squadron commander said, you know, if it wasn't for those ships, this would be a great job. And it would be, but we had to maintain the ships. So if it wasn't for the data, this networking would be just fantastic. If it wasn't for the hackers, this stuff would be great. We wouldn't have any problems. We wouldn't have to do all of this stuff. But the reality is that we do have to do all of this stuff. And this is, what are we going to do to protect the data? And this says data. Other cases, it may be to protect the equipment, protect the building, to protect the individuals. And the first line of protection should be to your workforce, because without the workforce, nothing's going to happen. So we have the users in the organization, the physical facility, perimeter network, internal network, perimeter network, the DMZ, the internal network, the protected network, the private network, the one inside the firewall, the host being a workstation. And I know we get into this node host business, and I think it's arguing about nothing, because what does it matter what it is? Yeah, some of them are pass through points. Nodes are pass through. A host actually is a beginning and an ending point. A workstation, a server, something like that. Applications, and finally we're going to get to the data and what we're trying to protect. The data typically is the company, and if you lose the data, you're having trouble. My dentist lost some of the data, obviously, a few months ago, because they sent out an email that said, oh, you know, we had a little problem with the computers, and if you had an appointment during this time, whatever, give us a call, because we don't know about it. If you don't have that information, if you don't have the client list, if he doesn't have his patients, who's going to come see him? How's he going to make a living? So the data is what's going to keep, along with the users, obviously. The people should be the first line of defense, first line of protection, and then we're going to do the other things after that. Secure the data, and these are some questions to ask. Where is it stored? And we kind of talked about that a little bit with the cloud storage, with cloud computing. Where is it stored? Do you know? And if you use a cloud, and we'll talk about virtualization tomorrow night, I think. If you use cloud storage, you don't really know where it is. You know it's on in a data farm somewhere, but you don't know where that is. It could be any place in the world, and their laws, their regulations to get to that may be different. You may lose that data, and this is where are you going to store it? How are you going to store it? How are you going to encrypt it? What kind of encryption you're going to use? What are the regulatory requirements? And I have alluded to the fact that if certain events happen in your company, like your company gets sued, you got to maintain all of the emails. And if you don't, then you, the network administrator, are going to be in trouble. You're going to be liable for that. Classified data. Again, everybody who's in the military seen classified data. It's not a foreign thought to you. It's, the different levels of classification. You need to do that in private industry too, so that you know how much protection to give to, assign to each of the individual bits of data. User permissions. Who can do what? Who can do what on the network? People love to have a lot of permissions. I had a couple of stories on that one. One of them, and this was a lot of years ago, there was a virus that went around that, if you've been doing this for a while, you might remember, called the I love you virus. And it got, one of our instructors got it. He happened to have administrative authority. He had an administrator user account on the server. This was a NetWare server. And instead of being logged on as his ordinary user, which you always should be, you should only be an administrator when you're doing administrator functions, because you can wind up doing a lot of damage. As he did, he got this email, logged in as administrator, couldn't resist finding out who loved him, and he opened it and it wiped out a whole bunch of stuff on the server simply because he had all of those permissions. If he had been logged in as a user, he would have done some damage, but he would have done damage to his own stuff, not to everybody else's. So what do we allow people to do? How much permission are we going to allow the individuals to have with these things? User permissions. How much, what? And again, only be an administrator when you need to be an administrator. Backups, and I guess the answer there is do them. And when you do backups, where are you going to store them? Who's going to be able to do, and this goes back to permissions. You can set up permissions so that one individual can make the backups, but somebody else has to restore them, that somebody can't back up and restore. I mean, it could steal some information that way. I mean, we're talking about security here. And you says, okay, you don't trust anybody. At some point, you got to trust some people, but you want to make it difficult for individuals to compromise information, either inadvertently or on purpose when we do those things. Protect the data. I say at rest and in motion. I wanted to get these words in here. At rest is a term that you'll hear for data that's stored on a hard drive. So do we encrypt the hard drives? You may need to do that. In motion, going across the network, being sent across the network. When a file is encrypted on a hard drive and is put on a network, the first thing that happens is it's decrypted, because that encryption only works on the hard drive at rest. We have to take a separate action, VPN or something like that, to encrypt it to go on the wire, to go on the network. And then here, organized so that you can detect changes. That's easier said than done, but we want to be able to detect any changes in the network. Secure disposal. We talked a little bit about, or at least mentioned, dumpster diving. People go through the trash and they find good things. And sometimes you ever walk down the street and look at the stuff that people are throwing away, maybe in their recycle bin. You get their bills, you get their Visa bill, their phone bill, and letters and things like that. You can get an awful lot, or a hacker can get an awful lot of information from things like that. But in private industry, don't throw it away. People throw away stuff that they shouldn't from the networking world. Maybe a list, a username list, users and phone numbers, and the phone numbers would be an entryway for social engineering. So you really do need to protect all of those things. And the last one there is, before you destroy something, be sure you don't need it anymore. There's nothing worse than shredding a document and then, whoops, I really did need that document and there's no other copies of it. I used to, when I was in the Middle East, we got so much junk traffic, just stand over the shredder and drop it in as I read it. And then you drop one and say, oops, I really needed that one. Fortunately, in that case, we could get other copies of these things. Secure applications. Review competing, when you're putting in an application, review competing applications for security flaws. Are there security flaws? And as we have seen over the course of time, it really looks like eventually everything's going to have a flaw of some sort in it. And there's a lot of people working on those. When you do have those flaws in the competing applications for security flaws, be sure that it can be updated. And the second one there, install all of the updates. Because again, what can happen if you don't install the update and the people that are trying to compromise your networks see that that is not installed, they'll reverse engineer the update to find out what it fixed. And now they'll know what to attack on the network. Configure AAA for those that support it, for the applications that support it. Who is using it? Who logged in? How much authority do we want to give users? And then the accounting portion, what did they do after they were on the network? Network apps, popular targets, emails, and browsers. There are a number of attacks on browsers, and we know we get the emails all the time. Even though the ISPs and our antivirus softwares try to filter all of those things out, doesn't always work out that way. That we may or may not be able to filter them all out. Be careful, and then users need to be educated as to what's going on with those things. Don't click on something that you don't know what it is for. I mean, we've heard that and heard that and heard that. The disable unnecessary services, we talked about a little bit about that when we were setting machines into the bastions, creating bastions, setting machines into the DMZ. With disable unnecessary services, we reduce the attack profile so that there are fewer things to attack when we do that, fewer applications to try to compromise, fewer ports to try to access the device on. And then the acceptable use policy, what is acceptable? And in these policies, the acceptable use policies, there's going to be a penalty of some sort if people violate it. And it doesn't have to be the first time around. You know, you do counseling and then warnings and all of the things, work your way up to severe penalties for violating those things, because when you create these policies, you need a reason to have created them. And the securing the host, the workstations is what we're talking about here. And the host, we could talk about servers too, but apply all operating systems updates and security patches. Big deal. It is a big deal. Reverse engineering. And reverse engineering is a real thing that these guys do. And in a scan, a vulnerability scan, I'll think of the word here in a second, users or hackers or people that use the softwares can determine what is your patch level, what updates have you installed on the system, are you up to date? And if they see that you're at a certain patch level and the other ones are out, then they'll get a reverse engineer. They know what to attack, because the reverse engineering, what did the patch fix? Install, disable unnecessary services. We've said that a number of times. Install security software, whatever is required. Antivirus software. Maybe we're going to run firewalls on the workstations. There's two schools of thought on that. One is that I already have a network firewall. Why do I need one on the individual host? And it's a decision that you have to make, because it's going to take resources, obviously, to run it on the host. But The reason that you might consider that you need the firewall on the host as well as in the network, what happens if something gets into the network? What happens if one of those guys comes in and happens to plug into a port that doesn't have port security configured and sets a worm loose on the network, or infects a couple of other machines, infects a server? You may want the individual hosts to have firewalls running on them to protect them from those different things. Uninterruptible power supplies, UPSs, with the essential servers, and the UPSs, the uninterruptible power supplies that are on the individual hosts, are not going to be ones that are going to run for days at a time. They're really designed to run for a short period of time on battery and allow you to do an orderly shutdown of the devices so that you don't corrupt the operating system, corrupt the data. It gets shut down using a shutdown process, not a crash process. Authentication procedures in accordance with the organizational password policy. And passwords are something that you need to consider how complex, how long, how often you're going to change them. It's a balancing act. And it's a balancing act between how much security do you need and how much are your users going to actually remember. You get into a lot of organizations, and about the time you get your password figured out and you know what it is and you remember it, then you got to change it. And it's got to be something really long. I was at one place where we didn't get to pick the passwords. When it came time to change the passwords, and I think we had to do them like every 45 days, they gave us a menu to pick from that we could use that were authorized passwords to do that. And this was one they came around to check, and you better not have written it down someplace to do those things. So to do those things. Disable unnecessary user accounts. People leave, and this happened at least in an academic environment fairly frequently, because people graduated. We didn't have 2 graduations a year. We had like every probably 5 or 10 weeks we had a graduation, and students left, and so they don't need the accounts anymore. But it became a real issue, I guess, to try to keep up with those. Are they going to come back? Are they coming back for another course? And if that's the case, you want to delete them, because if you delete them and recreate them, they're going to be different because they're all based on a number. But disable the accounts that are unnecessary. If you have somebody that leaves the organization, for instance, and you're going to hire somebody else in that position, you probably want to just disable the account so that when you get the new user, you just rename the account and they have all of the permissions that they need to do. And the next one there, speaking of permissions, restrict account permissions. Only give users the authority that they need. I said I had a couple of stories. The second story was that we had a number of nursing instructors who swore up and down that they needed to be able to install software on their computers in order to test it, to see if it works, to see if that's what they wanted in their classroom. So we gave them that for a little while until we found all sorts of adware, malware, viruses, and all sorts of things on the computers. They didn't just install their software. They were going places and clicking here and clicking there and installing all sorts of things. So people are going to say, I don't have enough permissions, I got to do this. And it may be more difficult for you because you have to do the installs. But your mission here, purpose here, is to protect, and that's what we're doing, securing the network, securing the host in this case. Disabling or restricting access to physical and virtual ports on the host itself, USB ports. And USB ports have become a real issue. The USB drives are enormous now. Users that have an ill will can take a tremendous amount of information out of the company on a little bitty flash drive. Stick it in their pocket, stick it in their purse. Not going to be able to see it. Probably not going to be able to detect it. So you may want to consider just simply disabling those ports. Is it a pain? Yes, it can be. But we're looking at securing. We're not looking at convenience in this particular segment. We're looking at how to make it secure. And, you know, if something is convenient, it's probably really not going to be all that secure. If it's secure, it's probably not going to be all that convenient. Establishing onboarding and offboarding procedures for devices. These are the personally owned devices, the bring your own device, the BYOD. Onboarding is when you allow the device onto your network, a procedure to do that, and then when a user leaves or gets a new device or whatever else, offboarding to take that device off, to take it completely off of the network. Securing the internal network, devices, switches, routers, firewalls. We want to configure, and we've talked a little bit about hardening them. The switches we did a number of things with. The big thing is put passwords on them. And you can put passwords on them. You can either use a Radius server or a TACACS server with usernames and passwords, or you can use locally stored, or you can use, everybody uses the same one, same as a pre-shared key in order to get into them. But you want to harden these things with usernames and passwords. Are you going to allow remote access? And we can use access control lists to specify which IP addresses, like the network administrator, are eligible to contact these things remotely. Remote management using only secure protocols, SNMP v3 and SSH, all the other SNMPs, Simple Network Management Protocol, versions are insecure. SSH replaces Telnet, which is insecure, clear text when I say insecure. Network segmentation to control traffic through the internal network. Think VLANs when we talk about segmentation. Security features of the routers and switches. Deploy specialized network security systems where they are going to be most effective. Some of those would be like the IPSs. Firewalls, I think, would be one of those things. Access control technologies. So that who can get there, access control, who can access specific things, and stronger encryption for the WAN and the VPNs. A stronger encryption, we talked a little bit about some of the encryption technologies. AES is the one that we really want to be able to use. Is it supported by all of the devices yet? No. Will it be eventually? We hope so. But go back to the routers. We can do authentication with them so that they authenticate with each other before they can share information, part of the hardening process. A lot of them, until you get to the newer ones, don't support that particular protocol. They support the other ones, maybe triple DES, to do that. They don't always support the stronger password protocols. They may have CHAP and PAP, and some of the really older ones are only going to support PAP, which are not what we want to use in the password world, but we got to use what we have with these things. Open ports needed for necessary services, but keep other ports closed and the services disabled. And when you open something, and I told you the story about the movie being stored on the server because somebody forgot to close the port. When you do, you probably want to make a record of it, kind of a checklist, going home checklist. I opened this one today, let so-and-so get in, and did I close it? You can check those things. And one of the other things that you may want to do occasionally, and probably team up with somebody, is scan each other. Nmap is an open source port scanning software. WinMap is the Windows version, the GUI version. Nmap is the command line version. But scan each other, see which ports are open, see if there's anything odd. And then you can look up to see if, yeah, this port is for a Trojan. And they use pretty standard ports that are there. And anything, out of the ordinary, look it up to see what's going on with these things. But, scan to see what's going on your network. Is it secure? Never transmit using non-secure protocols, and that's another easier said than done sometimes. But we should make an effort to encrypt all of the data. Sensitive data in particular should be encrypted. If they are sending your Social Security number from one location to the other, you really like it to be secure. A crisis is when something happens to you. Something bad is when it happens to somebody else, but it's a crisis for them, and we don't want to create crises with these things. Strong firewall protections between the DMZ and the interior network. And we looked at those things at the DMZs and the firewalls, what kinds of firewalls, the three-legged firewall, the two firewalls, the dual firewall, the outside to go to the DMZ, and then another one to get into the private network. Monitor exposed systems for signs of intrusion. The exposed systems would be our ones that are in the DMZ. The web server that we have out there, the email server that we have out there, whatever else that we may have in the DMZ for whatever purpose. Has there been an intrusion on it? Somebody compromised the system. So we need to monitor all of those devices. Physical security, we talked about some of these things already. The most secure areas possible for essential systems. The most, I guess, walls and doors and locks to get to it. And I always talk about in a central location, not on an exterior central location. The problem with some of these most secure areas is they're also the least traveled areas. So it's easy to have sometimes a lot of time to try to compromise them. Secure lock cabinets control a wireless coverage area so that we're not blasting into the parking lot. Somebody can compromise to get onto our network. Then they're inside our private network without going through the firewall. CCTV, closed circuit TV, and security cameras, a visitor policy, and security guards, maybe if you have security guards, or maybe just, somebody at a desk at the doors to greet people and to give them badges and those sorts of things, just so that people know that they're being watched. That's not going to stop the dedicated individual, but it can stop the I guess, compromises of opportunity from happening. We're going to promote security, train employees, and all of you, I think, probably are or have had or going to new jobs, going from old jobs. What kind of training? You got to think about what kind of training did your company do? What kind of training did they do to make you more aware of the risks that were going on? And we need to train in IT. We got to train each other. What are the new threats that are available? And everybody's going to have to be on the lookout for those kinds of things. Tailor duties and ensure that the duties are clear. And separation and rotation of duties. Separation of duties, rotation of duties. Separation of duties is kind of like what I was talking about to do a backup and then restore a backup, so that one person can't create the backup and then restore the backup. The separation of duties is one individual creates the backup, another one restores it. Is it easy to do? Is it efficient? Not necessarily. But again, we're going back to, we're talking security here. There's always going to be a middle ground for these things. And you have to balance the risk that you're taking with the inconvenience and the I guess, impediments that you're putting out there for the individual. Password policies can do that. If you have people change their password every 30 days and have a 15-character password, much like DOD did when they opened up some of their websites for things that you had to change. And I think it was every 30 days, and it was like a 12 to 15 characters with so many special characters, so many uppercase, lowercase numbers. Can't reuse more than 5 characters of an old password. Goes on and on and on. But don't make it so hard that people can't do it, because they're going to write it down and they're going to store it where it's readily available when we do those things. And off-premises handling of information. How is that going to happen? Can people take information off-premises? What can they take off-premises? One of the government's big compromises was an individual taking information off the premises, a laptop with a whole bunch of personnel records in it, that the laptop got stolen. And the first fear is, yep, all of those records are compromised. So now government, DOD, actually I think it was bigger than DOD, got to inform all these people that their personal information may have been compromised, up to Social Security numbers and about everything, because I think it probably had to do with some clearance investigations. Because this user decided to take a laptop with the records home to do some work at home. Yep. Is it convenient for him to do that? Yes, but it wasn't convenient for anybody after the laptop got stolen. They eventually found it, and a couple of teenagers in the neighborhood had stolen it, and all they wanted to do was pawn it to get the $100 or whatever they could for it. So they didn't really compromise the data, but they certainly had the opportunity to do that. The assessments themselves, and this is the process, catalog the assessments, make a list of them. How much is each asset worth? What are the vulnerabilities? And then once we determine the vulnerabilities, it says mitigate. It doesn't say eliminate, because you're never going to do that. We're going to mitigate. We're going to reduce the exposure, reduce the vulnerabilities to the maximum extent possible. So security logging, gather data over time, the vulnerability evaluation, expert review of the code that we have, the configurations, documentations, and have other people look at your network. And you can look at somebody else's network. What do they see that could be an issue? It's not necessarily an issue. And once you know about it, you can make a decision on whether you want to do anything about it or not. Vulnerability scanner, there are tools available to do that that will show you the vulnerabilities, and I think that the Windows has a scanner for Windows itself, and you can use it for an individual machine, or you can use it for an entire network or a grouping of machines. And penetration testing, this is where the ethical hackers come into play. Simulated attacks, and you may not want to do a full-blown penetration test. You may want to do a tabletop exercise to where you don't actually compromise the network. If you do a true penetration test, a full test, it can be pretty disruptive to the network, because they're going to actually try to compromise it. They're going to bring resources down. They're going to overload servers. They're going to make a mess out of your network. It can be very intrusive if you do a full test. So, and when you do that, if you get your ethical hacker and become one of these white hat hackers, the key to being a white hat hacker is that you have permission before you do it, before you do anything. Not just, well, come on, okay, I have permission to do a penetration test. You have to have permission for each step of the test so that the company knows what's going on with it, with the testing itself. Vulnerability scanners, we have port scanners, and again, one of those Nmap network mappers, and the network mapping software, it can be, it can draw a map of your entire network for you. Protocol analyzers, we've looked at that with Wireshark. Password crackers, there are a number of those available depending on the sophistication of the passwords, the sophistication of the software. May use anything from rainbow tables to just using a dictionary attack or attempting a brute force attack for these things. Web application vulnerability tester, database vulnerability scanners, and then wireless scanners. These are all devices that are available that you can use. And port scanners, try out Nmap. Or WinMap. WinMap is a lot easier to use. Network mappers, you can get those out there. Protocol analyzers, install Wireshark and look at your own network. What kind of traffic do you have? Because you know what's going on in your network, and you can see what's going on, what kind of things you can see with these. There are some password crackers available. Kate-Enable has a lot of different capabilities. If you want to play with some, you can set up a man-in-the-middle attacks. They have a little password cracker in there. They have record and playback voice over IP phones, all sorts of, and as well they have a wireless scanner in it too, I believe, as well as other things that are available with it. The troubleshooting portion of it is keep an eye out for change. What changed? What has been changed? Was it an authorized change? And that goes to, I think we probably haven't talked about it yet, but change management, probing and eavesdropping. Watch for those. Probing is scans basically to see what ports are available. Eavesdropping, we've talked about that. You can, Nmap is one of those things, or Wireshark. You can actually configure Wireshark with Nmap. You can configure Nmap so that it can tell you if there is another NIC that's in promiscuous mode, which would indicate that somebody is eavesdropping, scanning a network, or doing those things. Unauthorized accounts, rogue devices, we've talked a little bit about them, and DHCP snooping to prevent the rogue DHCP server, rogue wireless access points, and that's just a matter of honestly of looking at, seeing what is broadcasting. Is there something other than ours doing those things? Security holes, I say, okay, before that, software is up to date, all of the security up to date. Verify the security settings after an update. You ever have put something on, put an update on, and the whole world changes? And that's what that's all about. Verify the security settings after the update happens. Did it change anything? The security holes. When we bypass security, and I'll go back to the movie that got uploaded to the video, a security setting was bypassed. It was bypassed for a reason. It was not undone, I guess, repaired before everybody went home for the evening. And then you go home for the evening, you forget about it, and then it can go on for a long time unless you have the monitoring tools and the pay attention, keep an eye out for change, what changed with these things. But be sure that they're only bypassed for formal troubleshooting. Disable only the relevant security measures, not everything on the system. Isolate your sensitive systems and re-enable the security after we do troubleshooting. And then two strict security. We talked a little bit about that, particularly with passwords, but they interfere with normal operations. Access control lists, firewall settings may be too restrictive for things. User permissions, update them to match the duties. If somebody changes jobs, you're going to have to change the permissions that they have. What can they access? What can they do with these things? And after updates, be sure that no access problems were introduced by them. We're going to constantly be looking to see what changed, how did it change, what are the circumstances that goes on with these things. So I think that takes care of that particular